What if one moment of prejudice could expose everything, power, truth, and the real meaning of dignity? Picture this: a quiet teenage girl boards a plane, holding a ticket her father saved months to buy. She smiles politely, ready for her first flight in first class. But before she can sit, a flight attendant blocks her path and says, "Sweetheart, this seat isn't for you." The cabin falls silent. Dozens of eyes turn away. The girl's hands tremble, not from fear, but from disbelief. She whispers, "Ma'am, it's my seat." The woman laughs. "Not today. If that were you or your child, what would you do? Stay silent, or let the world know you belong right where you stand, because what no one on that plane knows is that the man waiting at the gate isn't just her father. He's the owner of the entire airline. And when he finds out what happened on that flight, the skies will never be the same again. This is not just a story. It's a mirror. One that asks, what would you do when respect is denied? Stay with us to see what justice looks like. 30,000 feet above the ground. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. The sun had barely cleared the edge of Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport when the first shimmer of light spilled across the runway. It painted the silver body of a North Star Airlines Dreamliner in a soft gold that made the plane look almost alive. Inside the terminal, people hurried past one another, clutching coffee cups, laptops, boarding passes, each carrying their own private story. 17-year-old Amira Dalton stood quietly near gate C-14, her small red suitcase upright beside her. She was dressed neatly, dark jeans, a cream sweater, and a Navy Harvard law hoodie she had saved for this very trip. Tomorrow, she would meet with a group of scholarship mentors in Seattle. Her first step toward the dream that her late mother once whispered about: one day, you'll argue not for victory, but for justice. Amira's hands were steady, though her heart was awake in that nervous, hopeful way only first flights alone can bring. She checked her boarding pass again. North Star Flight 781, Seat 1A, First Class. The words still felt surreal. Around her, the boarding area buzzed. A baby cried. Someone argued softly on speakerphone. Announcements echoed above Group 1 now boarding for Seattle. Amira joined the short line for first class. She smiled politely at the agent scanning passes. The agent, a young man with a shaved head, glanced at her ticket and waved her through with a courteous nod. Just beyond the jet bridge entrance stood Tracy Hunt, the flight's lead attendant, tall, fit, mid-40s, hair pulled into a precise bun. Her Navy uniform was immaculate, her posture almost military. Tracy was known among crews for her efficiency. She could recite safety protocols like poetry, but this morning, fatigue mixed with the quiet weight of judgment she'd never questioned. When she saw Amira approaching, Tracy's eyes narrowed not in malice, but in that reflexive calculation she mistook for professionalism. A teenager, alone, hoodie, sneakers, first class. Something didn't line up in her mental checklist. "Good morning," Amira said softly, handing over her boarding pass. Tracy glanced at it, then at her. Her smile tightened. "Sweetheart, this line's for first-class passengers only." Amira blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "I know. That's where I'm heading." The attendant's brow lifted. "May I see your ticket? It's right there in your hand." Amira replied politely. Tracy looked again. 1A, clear as daylight. Still, her tone cooled. "Well, sometimes there's confusion when people get promotional upgrades. There was a pause, thin as glass. Behind Amira, a businessman shifted impatiently, muttering something about schedules. Someone coughed. The moment stretched. Amira felt the old, familiar heat crawl up her neck, the one that came whenever a teacher double-checked her test or a cashier examined her bill twice. Still, she smiled. My father purchased the ticket weeks ago. It should be fine. Tracy's lips pressed into a line. Her instinct said, confirm. Her training said, trust the system. Her bias whispered, doubt. She tapped her radio. Operations. This is Hunt at Gate C14. Can you verify passenger Dalton, first name Amira seat 1A, possible mismatch? The voice on the other end crackled. Copy that. Give me a second. People nearby began to stare. Amira stood straight, willing her face not to betray the humiliation blooming inside. She thought of her father, Preston Dalton, somewhere in a meeting, maybe already boarding another North Star jet bound for D.C. He always told her, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Just stand. So she did. Tracy gave a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for your patience. I'm sure this will clear up soon. The line behind them grew restless. A woman sighed loudly. A child asked, Mom, why's she waiting? The radio crackled again. Passenger Dalton verified. System shows valid first-class ticket. Tracy frowned as if unsatisfied. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I see. Do you have photo ID? Amira handed over her passport. Tracy studied the photo longer than necessary, eyes moving from the image to the girl, back to the image again. Thank you, Tracy said curtly, handing it back. Then, almost as an afterthought, you traveling alone? Yes. Tracy's eyes softened slightly, almost maternal, but then hardened again. First trip, Amira nodded. To Seattle. Well, welcome aboard. Her tone carried an invisible but not quite welcome. Amira took a small breath and stepped toward the jet bridge. But Tracy's voice followed. Miss Dalton, just a moment. Amira turned. Tracy held out a hand. Your bag. It looks a bit large for the overhead compartment. Let me check it. It's under the limit, Amira said gently. I measured it. Tracy's smile thinned. I'll still need to verify. Security's pretty strict these days. She motioned to another crew member. The young attendant looked uneasy, but complied. Sliding the bag into the sizing rack, it fit easily. Seems fine, he murmured. Tracy nodded, though something in her face betrayed annoyance that the bag had fit. All right, go ahead. As Amira walked down the jet bridge, the air smelled of jet fuel and coffee. She should have been excited. She had dreamed of this flight for weeks. Instead, her chest felt heavy. She whispered under her breath, It's just a misunderstanding. Don't let it ruin your day. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin glowed with soft amber lights, wide leather seats, gentle piano music, warm towels stacked neatly on trays. Amira found 1A window seat. She slid her backpack beneath the seat, sat, and let out a long breath. A middle-aged man across the aisle glanced at her, offered a polite nod, then put on noise-canceling headphones. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. Then Tracy appeared at the front, greeting each passenger with a rehearsed smile. When her eyes met Amira's, her expression tightened once more. Miss Dalton, can I see your boarding pass again, just for verification? Amira froze. She handed it over silently. Tracy looked at it, pretending to compare numbers on a tablet. The other passengers watched now, their curiosity mixing with discomfort. The man with the headphones pulled them off, sensing tension. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just a quick check," Tracy said lightly. "Sometimes the seats get double booked." A small laugh from a passenger behind them broke the silence. "First-class problems, huh?" Amira swallowed hard. Her voice stayed calm. "I think the system already verified my ticket at the gate." "Yes, but it's good to be thorough," Tracy replied. At that moment, the younger attendant, Mark Nguyen, Vietnamese-American, early 30s, approached. "Tracy, the captain's asking for a pre-board check completion." "In a minute," she said. She was determined to finish whatever point she thought she was proving. Amira sat quietly. Inside, her thoughts swirled. Should I say my father works here? Should I tell her who he is? But a small, stubborn part of her resisted. She didn't want privilege to fix what prejudice had broken. Mark looked at her apologetically. Then he said softly to Tracy, "It's fine. She's cleared. We should close doors." Reluctantly, Tracy nodded, returning the pass. "Enjoy your flight." 2 words that sounded almost like an accusation. As the plane pushed back, Amira looked out the window. The sunrise glowed brighter, washing the world in gold. She thought about her mother, how she'd loved the idea of flying, of seeing the horizon from above the clouds. She imagined her saying, "Sometimes people see your color before they see your courage. Keep showing them both." She smiled faintly, then pulled her hoodie tighter. The engines roared, the plane lifted. For the next hour, things stayed quiet. Breakfast service began fresh fruit, omelets, croissants. When the tray reached Amira, Tracy hesitated again. "Are you sure you ordered vegetarian?" "Yes, ma'am. I requested it when booking." Tracy checked her list, then frowned. "It's not showing here. I'll see what I can do." She handed over a plate with bacon anyway. Amira looked down at it. "Thank you, but I don't eat pork." Tracy sighed. "Well, this is what we have left for now." Before Amira could respond, the man across the aisle removed his headphones. "She can have mine," he said simply, sliding his vegetarian plate across. "I'm fine with this one." Tracy froze. "Sir, that's not necessary." He smiled calmly. "Neither is making her uncomfortable." Something in the cabin shifted then. An invisible line had been crossed. People were paying attention. Tracy muttered, "Fine," and moved on down the aisle. Amira whispered to the man, "Thank you." He smiled kindly. No one should start their day being questioned for existing. His words sank deep. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Amira's phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Proud of you already. Call when you land. Love you." She typed back, "Love you too," but she didn't mention the incident. Not yet. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her, the tiny cuts of doubt, the quiet assumption that she didn't belong. She leaned against the window, watching clouds drift like slow rivers beneath. Somewhere inside, a promise formed this wouldn't end the way it began. Far ahead in the cockpit, Captain Andrew Cole adjusted altitude. His radio blinked with an internal alert passenger incident report filed Gate C-14, North Star 781. He frowned, glanced at his co-pilot, Dalton. Any relation to the co-pilot shrugged. Could be. Cole stared out over the endless white clouds, a quiet unease forming. Back in first class, Tracy poured champagne for another passenger, her smile perfectly rehearsed again. But her hand shook slightly. Something in the girl's calm composure bothered her, like a mirror she didn't want to look into. The flight continued. smooth, almost serene. Yet beneath that calm stretched invisible tension, thin and electric, waiting for the next spark. Amira opened her notebook. On the first page, she wrote a single line, every word, every look, every assumption. Then she underlined it twice. The engines hummed like distant thunder. The morning sun climbed higher, and at 37,000 feet, 2 lives, one bound by power, one tested by prejudice, moved quietly toward a collision neither of them could yet see. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft, amber hue as Flight 781 cruised west over the Mississippi River. Breakfast trays had been cleared, and the hum of the engines filled the silence between strangers. Most passengers leaned back into the comfort of leather seats, headphones cocooning them in their own worlds. Amira Dalton tried to focus on the clouds below. They drifted like endless white dunes, peaceful, far away from judgment. Yet the quiet couldn't erase the morning's sting. Her body was still tense, replaying Tracy Hunt's voice, calm, polite, and cutting. She took a slow breath, trying to let it go. Mark Nguyen, the younger flight attendant, passed by with a tray of coffee refills. He paused beside her row. "Miss Dalton," he said softly, "would you like some more orange juice? Please? Thank you." As he poured, his tone lowered. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about earlier. It shouldn't have gone that way." Amira met his eyes, surprised. "You don't have to apologize. Maybe not. But I was right there and didn't step in soon enough." His honesty disarmed her. "It's okay. You did more than you think." Mark nodded, gave a faint smile, and moved on. His quiet decency steadied her heart for a moment. Then she noticed Tracy near the galley, speaking with another attendant, glancing her way. The whispering, the sideways looks, Amira recognized that rhythm. She'd lived it before when she was the only black student in a debate club, when a teacher called her articulate as though it were a miracle. She pulled her hoodie's zipper halfway up and returned to her notebook. Across the page, she began listing what had happened step by step, time, tone, exact words. She wasn't angry for herself alone. She was documenting something bigger. Tracy approached again, balancing a digital tablet. "Miss Dalton, could I speak with you for a moment?" Amira closed her notebook. "Of course." Tracy's smile was professional, eyes unreadable. "It seems there's been another issue with our manifest. I need to verify your ticket once more." Several passengers turned subtly in their seats. The man across the aisle raised an eyebrow, murmuring under his breath. Amira's voice stayed calm. "You've already verified it twice." "I understand," Tracy said, "but this is procedure. Sometimes our system duplicates seat numbers." Amira exhaled slowly. "Do you think someone else has the same seat?" "It happens. May I ask, why is it always my seat?" The question hung between them. Tracy's expression stiffened. "Please don't take this personally." "How else should I take it?" Amira's tone was steady, not defiant. "You've questioned my ticket, my bag, my meal. At what point is it personal?" Tracy looked around, aware of watching faces. "I'm simply following policy. Miss Dalton." A soft voice broke in. Evelyn Parker, from 3 rows back, had stood up. Her silver hair glowed in the cabin light. "Excuse me," she said clearly. "I taught history for 30 years. I know what this looks like, and it's not policy, it's bias." A hush rippled through the cabin. Even the engine seemed quieter. Tracy straightened. "Ma'am, please take your seat. I will, once you stop embarrassing this young lady." Tracy's jaw tightened. "I'm asking respectfully." Evelyn folded her arms. "So am I." Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered, "Is this being filmed?" Another quietly lifted a phone. Amira's throat tightened. She didn't want a scene, yet she also didn't want to shrink. "It's all right, ma'am," she said to Evelyn. "Thank you." Then to Tracy, "If there's truly an error, please show me." Tracy hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the tablet, scrolling through data she didn't really need to see. Finally, she closed it. "Everything seems fine." Her voice trembled slightly, anger or embarrassment. Amira couldn't tell. Evelyn returned to her seat, muttering just loud enough, "Some people can't see dignity unless it's wearing a uniform like theirs." Tracy retreated to the galley, her composure cracking beneath the weight of so many eyes. For several minutes, no one spoke. Amira leaned back and felt her pulse slowly settle. But behind calmness was another feeling resolve. She'd endured this before, but this time she wouldn't just walk away. Half an hour later, turbulence jolted the cabin. The seatbelt sign blinked on. As trays rattled, the captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering a brief patch of rough air. Please remain seated." Amira gripped the armrest lightly, eyes on the window. Clouds darkened outside, swelling with storm light. She felt her phone buzz a text from her father. "Everything okay. Just saw internal report from flight. Call when you can." Her stomach tightened. She typed quickly, "I'm fine. Please don't worry." Then she hesitated and added, "I'll explain later." The phone buzzed again almost instantly. "Proud of you for staying calm. I'm tracking the flight." She smiled faintly. Even at 37,000 feet, Preston Dalton had a way of watching over her. When the turbulence passed, passengers relaxed again, drinks refilled, conversations resumed. The tension seemed to fade, at least for them. Tracy reemerged, face composed, voice brisk. She leaned down beside Amira. "Miss Dalton, would you mind stepping to the galley for a moment? I'd like to clear something up privately." Amira glanced around. "Can we talk here? I'd prefer discretion." The man across the aisle whispered, "You've got to be kidding." Amira stood, careful not to show hesitation. The aisle felt longer than it should have. When they reached the galley, the hum of machinery muffled the rest of the cabin. Tracy folded her arms. "I'm not sure what kind of story that passenger back there is trying to spin, but I need you to know I have nothing against you. I never said you did. Good. Because I treat everyone the same." Amira met her gaze evenly. That might be part of the problem. Tracy blinked. "Excuse me. When everyone is treated the same, people who need understanding the most get none. Equality isn't the same as empathy." The older woman's face flushed. "I don't need a lecture on empathy from a teenager." Amira's heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. "Then maybe you should listen to one." For a long moment they stood there. 2 generations, 2 worlds of experience colliding in silence. Then Tracy stepped back. "You can return to your seat." Amira nodded and walked away. As she sat down, Evelyn gave her a quiet thumbs up. The man across the aisle whispered, "Good for you." She wanted to feel victorious, but she didn't. She felt tired of proving, of explaining, of being the lesson someone else needed. Half an hour later, the cabin lights dimmed again for rest. Passengers closed window shades. The hum of engines became a lullaby. Amira leaned her head against the window, eyes open to the faint glow of daylight at the horizon. Inside her, two voices wrestled. One said, "Let it go. It's over." The other whispered, "If you stay silent, it happens again." She thought of her father, how he'd once told her about his early days as a pilot, when a passenger refused to believe a black man could fly this plane. He'd laughed while telling it, but the sadness underneath had stayed with her. A memory surfaced, her mother standing by the kitchen window, saying softly, "Sometimes change doesn't start with anger. It starts with documentation." Amira looked at her phone. She opened the camera app, typed a brief note describing everything from the gate to the galley, then saved it in the cloud. Evidence, not revenge. Truth preserved. In the galley? Tracy sipped cold coffee, staring at the cabin door. Mark approached. Voice low. "You need to ease up. I'm doing my job. You're doing more than that, and you know it." Her eyes flashed. "You think I'm racist? I think you're scared of making a mistake, of being accused, of losing control, but fear's driving this plane, not policy." She turned away, jaw set. "You wouldn't understand." "Maybe not," Mark said, "but passengers do. They always do." The rest of the flight continued in uneasy silence. When the captain announced descent into Seattle, Amira felt both relief and dread. Relief that it was ending. Dread that there might still be one more humiliation left before the ground. As the wheels touched down, a soft cheer rippled through the cabin. Passengers clapped lightly, glad to be home. Amira exhaled, but the intercom clicked again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll be holding at the gate for a brief delay. Thank you for your patience." Tracy's eyes met Mark's. He frowned. She shrugged. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Captain Cole's voice returned. "Flight attendants, remain at stations. Additional personnel will be boarding shortly." Whispers spread among passengers. "What's going on, security?" Amira's phone vibrated another message from her father. "Stay calm. I'll meet you at the gate." Her breath caught. He was here. Tracy adjusted her jacket, unaware of what was coming. "Probably just a maintenance check," she said, though her tone carried uncertainty. Amira closed her notebook. Her hands trembled not from fear, but anticipation. Something was about to shift. Outside the window, ground staff gathered near the door. One of them wore a North Star executive badge. Another was a uniformed pilot, older, tall, shoulders straight. Preston Dalton stepped from the jet bridge into the cabin light. Gasps rose like wind through the seats. Passengers whispered, "That's him, the CEO." Tracy's smile froze, professional mask cracking for the first time. Preston looked around slowly, eyes calm but piercing, then found his daughter. Amira stood, heart pounding. For a brief moment, no words passed between them, just understanding. The captain appeared from the cockpit, saluting slightly. "Sir," Preston nodded. "Captain Cole, thank you for holding position." Then he turned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. There's a matter that needs addressing before anyone leaves this aircraft." Tracy swallowed hard. Amira sat down again, pulse racing. She could feel the air thicken with expectation. Her father's voice remained measured, almost gentle. "Earlier this morning, one of our passengers was questioned repeatedly about her right to sit where her ticket placed her. That passenger happens to be my daughter, But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because no one child, parent, stranger should have their dignity inspected before they fly. A stunned silence filled the cabin. Tracy's lips parted, but no sound came out. Amira felt tears prick her eyes not from pain, but from the strange, heavy relief of being seen. Her father continued, I built North Star to connect people, not divide them. If anyone under my name forgets that, we'll correct it. He looked directly at Tracy. We'll speak privately once the passengers have disembarked. Then, turning to the rest of the cabin, he bowed his head slightly. Thank you for your patience. Please know we'll do better. Applause began soft, hesitant, then growing. It wasn't for spectacle. It was for truth spoken aloud. Amira watched her father, the man she'd admired since childhood, standing in the narrow aisle between judgment and redemption. She realized he wasn't just protecting her. He was protecting everyone who had ever been silently told they didn't belong. When the door finally opened and passengers began to exit, Tracy remained frozen at her post. Mark gave her a look that mixed pity with challenge. Now you know, he whispered. She didn't answer. Amira was the last to leave. As she stepped into the jet bridge, her father placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay, baby girl? She nodded. I will be. He smiled faintly. Then so will they. Outside. The Seattle rain had begun to fall, soft and steady. Each drop shimmered against the tarmac like tiny pieces of truth washing something clean. The rain followed them all the way from the jet bridge to the car. It wasn't the kind of storm that screamed with thunder. It was quieter, heavier, the kind that seemed to listen. Preston Dalton held the door for his daughter before sliding in beside her. The smell of wet concrete mixed with the faint citrus of the leather seats. For a while, neither of them spoke. The car eased through the airport roads, headlights carving thin lines through the mist. Finally, Preston said softly, You handled yourself well in there. Amira looked down at her hands. I didn't feel like I did. He smiled faintly. That's because dignity never feels loud, it just feels steady. She turned to him, eyes searching. Dad, did you already know about what happened? He nodded. One of our ground crew flagged an irregular incident report. It came through internal communications. I didn't know it was you until I checked the passenger manifest myself. So, when you texted me, I was already on my way to the terminal. The weight of his calmness both comforted and frightened her. What happens now? That depends, he said, on what we want this to mean. She frowned slightly. You mean, like press statements? Preston shook his head. I mean the story we tell the world, not just the one they'll print. The car passed through the glowing city edge. Seattle's skyline blurred in the distance, silver against gray. Amira leaned her forehead against the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. I don't want to be another headline, she murmured. I just want people to stop assuming who I am before I speak. Her father nodded slowly. That's exactly why we have to respond differently. They drove in silence for another stretch before he added, You know, when I first started flying, I was the only black pilot on my crew for 6 years. I thought if I worked harder, smiled wider, spoke softer, maybe they'd see me as capable. Some did. Most just saw a man they didn't expect to be there. Amira's eyes softened. So, what did you do? I stopped trying to be what they expected, Preston said, and I built something that no one could deny existed. She smiled faintly. North Star? He glanced at her, a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. And yet, even now, my daughter gets questioned on one of my planes. The words hung heavy in the quiet. When they arrived at the Dalton residence, a sleek, glass-lined home overlooking Lake Washington, the sky had turned from gray to black. Inside, the lights were warm, almost too gentle against the storm's reflection on the windows. Preston set his briefcase down, loosened his tie, and poured 2 cups of chamomile tea. Amira sank into the couch, curling her knees beneath her. "Dad," she said after a moment, "do you ever get tired of forgiving people?" He smiled faintly. "Every day." "Then why keep doing it?" He sat across from her, hands clasped, because anger without direction builds nothing, but forgiveness without boundaries teaches nothing either. The trick is finding the balance. Amira nodded slowly. "Then, what's the balance now?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I intend to find out." He reached for his phone and typed a message to his chief of operations schedule internal review. "Flight 781 entire crew, confidential." Then he looked back at his daughter. "You've done your part. Now let me do mine." That night, long after she'd gone to bed, Preston remained in his study. The desk lamp cast a small pool of light over the polished wood. Rain streaked the window pane like restless fingers. He opened the flight report again. Timestamps, crew names, coded remarks. Tracy Hunt's notation was concise but telling passenger in two-way, multiple verifications required due to ID discrepancies. There had been no discrepancies. The system flagged nothing. It was bias disguised as procedure. Preston sighed. He'd seen this pattern before, not just in the airline industry, but everywhere power met fear. People hid behind policy the way children hid behind curtains pretending not to be seen. He closed the file, his reflection faintly mirrored on the dark glass. "We're not hiding anymore," he whispered. The next morning, Amira woke to sunlight spilling through her blinds. For a brief, strange moment, she thought maybe the world had reset, but her phone notifications said otherwise, articles already circulating. Passengers posting videos of her father standing in the aisle, his calm voice echoing through headlines. CEO confronts bias on his own flight. Daughter of North Star founder questioned in first class. From corporate boardroom to cabin justice. Amira scrolled slowly, her stomach twisting. Some comments praised, others mocked. Some questioned her story entirely. She went downstairs. Her father was already at the kitchen island, laptop open, mug half empty. He looked up as she entered. "They've already spun it?" she asked. He nodded. "That's the internet. Fast, noisy, rarely fair." "Are you going to issue a statement?" He looked thoughtful. "Eventually. But first, I'm going to have a conversation." "With who? Tracy Hunt?" Amira froze. "You're going to meet her?" "Yes," he said simply. "Everyone deserves the chance to explain themselves before judgment." Her jaw tightened. Even after what she did, especially then. The words stung because they were true. By noon, Preston arrived at North Star's headquarters, a tall, glass-walled tower overlooking Elliott Bay. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, a blend of corporate ambition and constant motion. As he walked through, employees nodded, whispers following in his wake. They'd all seen the footage by now. He was the CEO who'd stepped into his own cabin to confront injustice. In the conference room, Tracy sat waiting. Her posture was rigid, her uniform flawless, but the circles under her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "Mr. Dalton," she began quietly as he entered. "Thank you for seeing me." He took a seat across from her. "I always see my people. Ms. Hunt. The question is, do you—" She flinched slightly. "Sir, I didn't mean to offend your daughter. I was just following protocol." He folded his hands. "Tell me, which protocol allows you to check a paid passenger's ticket 3 times?" She hesitated. "There were inconsistencies on the manifest, no." He interrupted softly. "There weren't?" "I checked myself." Her shoulders tensed. "Sometimes it's instinct. Sir, you notice something that doesn't feel right." "Instinct," Preston repeated slowly, leaning forward. "That's an interesting word, because instinct can mean experience, or it can mean prejudice trained so deeply it feels like safety." Tracy's eyes glistened. "I didn't think of it that way." "That's the problem," he said gently. "You didn't think at all. You reacted." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I'm not a bad person. I believe that," Preston said. "But good people can still do harmful things when they stop examining why they act the way they do." She nodded slowly, voice trembling. "What happens now?" He paused before answering. "That depends on you. I'm placing you on leave pending retraining and psychological evaluation, not for punishment, but for accountability." Her eyes widened. "You're not firing me." "No," he said, "but I am asking you to rebuild your understanding of service from the ground up." She exhaled shakily. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Preston said quietly. "Prove it." As she left the room, he remained still, staring at the faint reflection of the North Star logo on the table's glass surface. The storm outside had passed, but another was just beginning, one that would reach beyond this single flight. Later that evening, a message came through from his communications director. Public sentiment mixed. Some accuse favoritism, others call it leadership. Interviews requested from CNN, NPR, and Forbes. Preston replied simply, "We respond with truth, not theater." When Amira came into his office that night, she found him surrounded by open folders, diagrams, and handwritten notes. "What's all this?" she asked. He looked up, tired but determined. "A plan. I'm going to launch an internal program across the entire company. Bias audits, anonymous reporting, empathy-based retraining, something lasting." She frowned. "Will people think it's just PR?" "Some will, but if even one flight attendant changes how they see a passenger, it's worth it." Amira nodded, then hesitated. "Can I help?" He smiled softly. "You already have." That night, father and daughter worked side by side, her refining language for the public statement, him sketching frameworks for reform. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city clean and still. When the statement went live the next morning, it wasn't defensive. It didn't mention titles or excuses. It read, "North Star Airlines acknowledges that dignity is not optional. We failed to uphold that for one of our own, and by extension, for all who fly with us. We will correct, we will learn, and we will lead." The message spread quickly. Some applauded, some scoffed, but most paused. For once, an airline didn't hide behind legal jargon. In homes, offices, and classrooms across the country, people shared the video of Preston standing calmly in the cabin. Parents pointed him out to their children. Teachers discussed bias and accountability. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment in Portland, Tracy Hunt watched it too. Her hands trembled as she replayed the footage, not of herself, but of the moment Preston said, No one should have their dignity inspected before they fly. She pressed her palm to her chest and whispered, "He's right." In that moment, something in her cracked not from shame, but from recognition. Back at North Star, Preston looked out the window of his office as the afternoon light caught the horizon. Amira stepped beside him, holding 2 coffees. "Do you think people can really change?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Only if they choose to. And if they don't, then we keep building systems that make it harder for prejudice to survive." Amira looked at him, admiration flickering beneath her calm expression. "You sound like Grandpa." Preston laughed softly. He'd like that. They stood there a while longer, watching a North Star jet ascend through the clearing sky, sunlight glinting off its wings. For the first time since that flight, Amira felt something like peace, not because the world was fixed, but because someone had finally begun to fix the foundation. As the plane disappeared into the blue, Preston turned to her. "You ready for the real work?" Amira nodded. "Always." The sky outside blazed open like a promise. The following week at North Star headquarters felt different. Conversations hushed when Preston Dalton passed by. Employees who once moved briskly through hallways now carried themselves with a faint self-consciousness, as if the entire company had been caught looking in a mirror for the first time. On the top floor, the sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering across the table of the executive boardroom. The mood inside was far from bright. Reports were spread out statistics, press reactions, and social media analyses. At the center sat Preston, composed as always, while across from him, several board members exchanged uneasy glances. "Preston," said Gerald Whitmore, North Star's CFO, his voice tight, "we appreciate your passion, but public attention is growing out of hand. Investors are nervous." Preston leaned back slightly, calm. They should be. Complacency costs more than crisis. Gerald frowned. "The footage went viral because it involved your daughter. People think this is a PR stunt to humanize the company. Then let's show them it's not." Preston replied, "We're not performing accountability, we're institutionalizing it." Another executive, a woman named Lila Morgan, tapped her pen. "With respect, Mr. Dalton, reforms are noble, but grounding bias is a cultural issue, not a procedural one. You can't legislate empathy." Preston smiled faintly. "No, but you can engineer exposure. If we create systems that force people to see beyond themselves, change follows." Lila studied him, thoughtful but wary. Gerald sighed. "This is going to hit our quarterly goals." Preston met his gaze. "Then maybe we've been chasing the wrong kind of altitude." The room fell quiet. For a long moment, all anyone could hear was the hum of the city below. Finally, Lila spoke again, her tone gentler. "What exactly do you propose?" Preston stood and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, a North Star jet rose through clouds, sunlight painting its tail like a silver flame. "We're launching an initiative called Clear Skies. It will mandate bias awareness, conflict de-escalation, and empathy simulations across every department from baggage handlers to senior pilots. And it won't be optional." A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. Gerald's brow furrowed. "Do you realize the cost?" "Yes," Preston said, "and I also realize the cost of not doing it." The meeting ended in reluctant agreement, but outside those glass walls, resistance began to brew. Downstairs, in the crew lounge, murmurs spread among attendants. Some supported the CEO's move, others felt attacked. It's like we're all being punished for one woman's mistake," someone muttered. Mark Nguyen looked up from his tablet. "It's not punishment, it's progress. If we don't change ourselves, passengers will do it for us." Across from him, a senior attendant named Carol shook her head. "Easy for you to say, rookie. You weren't the one being filmed." Mark sighed. "Maybe that's the point. Cameras or not, we should act like we're always being watched by our own conscience." Carol frowned but said nothing more. Meanwhile, news outlets continued dissecting every angle of the incident. Commentators debated whether Preston's reaction was genuine or performative. Hashtags like "Fly with Dignity" and "DOS North Star Accountability" trended for days. At school, Amira tried to stay invisible. Her friends whispered about the story but avoided eye contact. Some congratulated her for exposing racism. Others tiptoed around her like she carried controversy. During lunch, she sat by the window, headphones in but no music playing. She just needed quiet. Then a soft voice interrupted. "Mind if I sit?" It was Natalie Brooks, her debate team captain, a white girl with sharp eyes and gentle manners. "Sure," Amira said, sliding her bag aside. Natalie unpacked her salad. "Crazy week." "Huh," Amira smirked faintly. "That's one way to put it. I watched the video." Natalie said, "I kept thinking, that could have been anyone. You just happened to be the one who didn't let it slide." Amira looked at her, surprised. "You believe me?" Natalie's brow furrowed. "Why wouldn't I?" Amira shrugged. "Online. People say my dad staged it. Some think we made it up for attention." Natalie stabbed her fork into lettuce. "People can't handle stories that make them uncomfortable. They'd rather call it fake than admit it's familiar." The words landed heavy. Amira nodded slowly. "Thanks." Natalie smiled faintly. "You know, our next debate topic is about corporate ethics. You should join the team meeting. Might be therapeutic." Amira laughed softly. "Maybe." That night, Preston sat alone in his office again, reviewing internal emails. His assistant, Raymond, entered quietly. "Sir, you should see this." He handed Preston a printed message, anonymous, unsigned. It read, "You may own this airline, but you'll never own our skies. Keep politics off our planes." Preston read it twice, his jaw tightening just slightly. Security trace Raymond shook his head. "Untraceable, probably sent through a proxy." Preston placed the letter aside. "We'll let the message speak for itself. If equality feels like politics, then we're proving why this work matters." The following morning, Tracy Hunt returned for her formal evaluation. She'd dressed in plain clothes this time. No uniform, no badge, no shield of authority. Her hands trembled slightly as she entered the conference room where Preston awaited. "Good morning," he said. "Morning, sir. You've completed the first phase of retraining." "Yes." It opened my eyes. He nodded. "Tell me what you learned." She hesitated. "That my instincts aren't neutral. That fear doesn't excuse harm. That sometimes the uniform makes you feel bigger than you are. And you forget the person across from you feels small." Preston studied her quietly. "Do you believe you can change that I have to?" she said softly. "Otherwise, everything I've done means nothing." He leaned back. "You sound sincere, but redemption isn't a speech, Ms. Hunt. It's consistency." "I know." He looked at her a moment longer, then extended a small folder across the table. "These are new service protocols for empathy intervention, what I call human moments. You'll help test them." Her eyes widened. "You want me to help, yes," he said simply, "because transformation means nothing if it doesn't come from the inside." Tracy accepted the folder, hands trembling. "Thank you for believing I still have something to give." Preston smiled faintly. "You're not the only one being tested." That afternoon, he called a press conference, the room filled with reporters, cameras, and curious employees. Amira stood quietly in the back, heart pounding. Preston stepped to the podium. No notes, no teleprompter. "A week ago, an incident aboard Flight 781 reminded us that progress isn't automatic. It requires maintenance. Many asked why I intervened personally. The truth is, I didn't act as a CEO. I acted as a father. But leadership means turning personal conviction into public policy." Flashes went off. Murmurs filled the air. He continued, voice even but resonant. "North Star's new Clear Skies initiative will not only retrain staff, it will publish quarterly transparency reports on passenger treatment data. We'll measure humanity with the same precision we measure fuel." Reporters scribbled furiously. One shouted, "Mr. Dalton, isn't this overreaction to one flight attendant's error?" Preston's gaze didn't waver. One flight attendant did not cause this. A culture that allowed complacency did, and I'm not interested in reaction. I'm interested in reconstruction. Applause erupted not from reporters, but from staff lining the walls. Even Amira clapped quietly, her chest swelling with pride. That night, footage of the speech swept across news networks. Preston's words became viral sound bites. Commentators debated his approach, but the tone had shifted from doubt to respect. In homes across the country, strangers began sharing their own flight stories, moments of subtle bias, awkward silence, unexpected kindness. The conversation moved beyond one airline to something larger. Meanwhile, in a small suburban church, Tracy stood before a community group. She had volunteered to speak about bias and redemption. "I used to think respect was about control," she told them. "But real respect is surrender the courage to see someone else fully. I learned that the hard way." When she finished, people stood to applaud. For the first time in years, she felt worthy of the uniform she hadn't yet put back on. At home, Amira scrolled through the news again, her father's face everywhere. She smiled, but part of her still ached. She remembered the fear in Tracy's eyes that day, and wondered if she too could forgive as easily as her father did. The next morning, she found him in the garden, trimming small lemon trees, a hobby he'd picked up from her late mother. "You don't rest, do you?" she teased. He chuckled. "Rest is overrated when the world's still turning crooked." She sat beside him on the wooden bench. "Dad, do you think people really change? Or do they just hide better?" He paused, setting the shears aside. "Some hide, but some rebuild. Change isn't a straight road. It's a staircase with missing steps. You fall, you climb again." She nodded slowly, then smiled. "Then maybe it's time we help others climb too." He turned to her. "What are you thinking?" "A youth program," she said. "Workshops for teenage passengers about self-advocacy, respect, empathy from both sides of the aisle. Maybe call it Voices in Flight." Preston's eyes softened with pride. "Your mother would have loved that." They sat together in silence, the morning sun breaking through the clouds. Across the city, a North Star plane rose into the blue, and somewhere inside, passengers of every color and creed sat side by side, each unaware that the air around them carried the faint echo of a promise born from one small act of dignity. For a while, it seemed like peace had returned. The press had calmed down, the company's reforms were underway, and public opinion began to shift in North Star's favor. But peace, Amira would soon learn, was fragile, especially when it threatened power. It started with whispers online, anonymous posts claiming that Clear Skies was a publicity gimmick, that North Star's diversity reforms were anti-merit, that Preston Dalton was dividing the company. Comment sections turned venomous. Influencers amplified conspiracy threads suggesting the viral video had been staged by corporate elites. One evening, as Preston reviewed monthly reports in his study, Raymond entered with concern etched across his face. "Sir, the board's requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They're citing shareholder pressure." Preston looked up slowly. Pressure from where Raymond hesitated. An anonymous group calling itself the Traditional Alliance. They've been buying small amounts of stock, enough to stir noise. They're rallying other investors around the idea that your reforms are alienating the core customer base. Preston set his pen down. "So, equality is bad for business now." Raymond sighed. "They're framing it as overreach. Some want you to issue an apology to say the incident was exaggerated." Preston's expression didn't change. Truth doesn't require apology. Still, he felt a pulse of frustration behind his calm demeanor. He'd spent his life building something meant to unite people, not divide them. But now, the very act of inclusion had become a battlefield. The next morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Gerald Whitmore, the CFO, sat stiffly at the far end, while Lila Morgan leaned back, arms crossed, watching the tension unfold. "Preston," Gerald began, "we respect your ideals, but shareholders are worried. The airline's brand is becoming political." Preston clasped his hands. "Human dignity isn't politics," Gerald countered. "It is when it impacts profits." Lila cut in sharply. "Enough. This isn't about profits. Gerald, it's about values. The world is watching, and North Star is setting a precedent. You can't build loyalty on silence." Gerald shot her a glare, but she didn't back down. Preston finally spoke. "If our investors want a company without conscience, they've bought into the wrong sky." The words hung like thunder in the still room. Lila smiled faintly. Gerald looked away. After the meeting, Preston retreated to his office, exhaustion tugging at his shoulders. He wasn't tired of work. He was tired of resistance disguised as reason. He looked at the framed photo on his desk of Amira as a little girl, wearing a tiny captain's hat, smiling at the clouds. He whispered to the photo, "I won't let them drag us back down." Meanwhile, Amira's school life had become an echo chamber of gossip. Some classmates treated her like a celebrity. Others avoided her entirely. During lunch, 2 students she didn't know whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Her dad's the reason tickets are going up." "Yeah, all this diversity stuff is costing them millions." Amira clenched her jaw but didn't respond. She'd learned her father's version of grace, the kind that looked calm on the outside but burned hot underneath. Later that afternoon, she sat with Natalie in the library, trying to focus on her debate notes. Natalie noticed her silence. "You okay?" Amira shrugged. "Sometimes I think change is a lot louder than I thought it'd be." Natalie smirked. "That's because it's echoing in walls that were never built for you." Amira smiled faintly. "You should be on the team, too." They both laughed quietly, tension easing for a moment. At that same hour, hundreds of miles away, A new storm brewed online. A popular talk show host aired a segment titled When CEOs Go Woke. Footage of Preston's speech played in the background as the host criticized corporate moral theater and accused North Star of weaponizing race for marketing. By nightfall, the video had millions of views. At home, Amira scrolled through hateful comments, each one like a splinter under her skin. Privilege playing victim. Race card at 37,000 feet. If her dad wasn't CEO, she'd be grounded. She put her phone face down, fighting the tears stinging behind her eyes. Her father entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You've been reading again." She sighed. "They're calling you a fraud." He set the mugs down. "Let them. How do you not care I care?" Preston said softly. "But I've learned that noise only hurts when you mistake it for truth." She looked at him, frustrated. "But what if people stop believing in you?" He smiled faintly. "Then we just have to live in a way that makes belief unnecessary." The next day, Preston received an anonymous email with a video attachment. When he opened it, his chest tightened. It was footage from inside a North Star maintenance hangar crew members laughing as one of them mockingly reenacted the Flight 781 incident. The man, wearing a wig and fake badge, pretended to be Tracy Hunt. Another played Amira, holding a toy ticket and whining in a childish voice. The laughter was ugly. The video ended with someone saying, "Guess she learned who really owns the skies." Preston stared at the screen in silence, fury rising like a quiet tide. He replayed the clip twice, then pressed the intercom. "Raymond, I need security to trace the origin of this video and call the ethics department within hours." The investigation began. The culprits, 3 ground crew members, were identified and suspended. But Preston didn't stop there. He held a company-wide meeting, streamed live to every North Star employee. When he stepped onto the stage, the air was electric with unease. "Some of you think this is about one girl," he began, his voice low but resonant. "You're wrong. This is about what we allow to fly under our banner. Every mockery, every whisper, every unspoken tolerance of disrespect weighs us down more than gravity ever could." He paused, eyes sweeping across the crowd. "If we can't protect dignity inside our planes, we don't deserve to carry anyone above the clouds." The room was silent. Even the skeptics couldn't look away. After the speech, messages flooded in, some angry, others apologetic, most reflective. Preston didn't read them all. He didn't need to. He could feel the shift happening beneath the noise, subtle but real. That evening, Amira waited for him in the living room. She'd seen the speech online, watched him stand firm with quiet fire. "You were incredible," she said softly as he walked in. He smiled. "You sound surprised." "I'm not, just proud." He chuckled, sitting beside her. "You know, I was scared." She looked at him, startled. He nodded. "Not of people, of losing faith in them, in this mission. But then I remembered you sitting on that plane, holding your ground with nothing but grace. And I thought if my daughter can be brave at 17, I can be brave at 52. She leaned against him, tears glimmering. Mom would have been proud too. He placed a hand over hers. "She already is." Weeks passed, and the backlash began to soften. North Star's transparency reports gained praise from human rights organizations. Airlines across the country contacted Preston for collaboration. A CNN headline read, "From Scandal to Standard North Star's Clear Skies Becomes Industry Model." But beneath the surface, a quieter threat lingered. Late one night, Preston's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "You think you can fix the skies. We're not done yet." He sat in the dark study, staring at the screen, his reflection faint in the glass. A chill ran through him, not of fear, but of clarity. For every person inspired, another felt threatened. Change didn't just challenge systems, it exposed souls. In that moment, he understood something his late wife once told him. Real progress isn't when the storm stops. It's when you keep walking through it without closing your eyes. And so he did. The next morning, he announced a partnership with national regulators to expand the Clear Skies program beyond North Star, making it open source, available to any airline willing to confront its own culture. Some executives called it madness, others called it legacy. Amira watched the news from her bedroom, a quiet smile forming. Her father was still standing, still building, and somewhere deep down, she realized so was she, because this was no longer just her story or his. It was the story of everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong and refused to move. Outside, the first hints of dawn stretched across the horizon. The world below still fought, still fumbled, still feared. But in the sky, the light was returning. The morning air felt heavier than usual when Preston arrived at headquarters. Outside, protesters lined the street, some holding signs that read, "Keep business out of politics." Others shouting, "Equality isn't division." News cameras swarmed like bees, hungry for sound bites. Inside, the tension was thicker still. The lobby that once greeted him with quiet reverence now buzzed with unease. Employees whispered in corners. Security stood alert, and even the receptionist avoided eye contact. Raymond approached quickly. "Sir, I think you should see this." He handed Preston a printed report marked "Confidential." The headline on the first page hit like a punch, "Internal leak. CEO under investigation for ethics violation." Preston's brows tightened. What violation apparently? They're claiming you used company funds to sponsor Clear Skies in a way that benefits your own image, self-promotion under the guise of social reform. Preston exhaled slowly. Who's behind it? Raymond hesitated. All evidence points to Whitmore, but there's more. He's scheduled a press statement this afternoon. Says he'll reveal documents to the media. For a brief moment, Preston said nothing. Then, calmly, "Get Lila, now." Minutes later, Lila Morgan entered the office, fire in her stride. "I knew he'd try something like this," she said. "Gerald's been feeding discontent since the reforms cut his bonuses." Preston rubbed his temple. "So, he's painting compassion as corruption." Lila's eyes blazed. "Let him. The truth will hold. It always does." But even she knew truth didn't always win on its own. It needed timing, proof, and courage. Meanwhile, at North Star High, Amira sat in the cafeteria scrolling through social media. The headlines made her stomach twist. CEO Preston Dalton faces scandal. Diversity hero or manipulative executive, her classmates whispered again. The same way they had months ago, but this time it stung differently. She closed her phone and pushed away her tray. Natalie looked at her, concern etched on her face. "You know this is garbage, right? They're scared of what your dad's doing." Amira nodded faintly, but inside, the fear crept in. What if they destroy him at that very moment across town? Gerald Whitmore stood before a row of microphones. He wore a navy suit and a mask of righteousness. We believe in transparency, he declared. Recent internal reviews suggest misappropriation of company resources by Mr. Dalton under the Clear Skies Initiative. The board must ensure accountability, regardless of title. Reporters shouted questions, flashes erupted. Whitmore basked in the noise, mistaking chaos for control. By noon, every major outlet had picked up the story. Hashtags multiplied. Investors called for explanations. Preston's name trended again, but this time, not as a hero. Back in his office, Lila placed a folder on the desk. Here's what we found. Whitmore doctored expense reports, diverted his own payments to make them look like yours. Preston's jaw tightened. We have proof enough to bury him. He didn't smile. We don't bury people. Lila, we expose truth. At 3 p.m., while Whitmore basked in media attention. Preston scheduled his own press conference set for 5. The PR team begged him to delay, but he refused. Delay implies guilt. Clarity restores trust. When he stepped into the press room 2 hours later, the air was electric with speculation. Cameras turned, microphones extended, but Preston looked composed, tall, poised, the embodiment of quiet strength. "Good evening," he began. "There's been much said today about integrity, leadership, and truth. I won't spend time defending my name. I will, however, defend the principle that got us here." He gestured toward the large screen behind him. "This is a record of every transaction related to Clear Skies, each one reviewed, approved, and audited by external firms." And here he clicked again, his evidence of altered ledgers, traced to accounts controlled by Mr. Whitmore. A murmur swept through the room. Reporters leaned forward. "I don't ask for belief," Preston continued. "I offer proof. The same transparency I expect of everyone who wears our emblem." Lila, watching from the wings, felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just a defense, it was leadership at its most raw and human. By the time Preston finished, silence filled the room. Then applause, tentative at first, then growing, steady, undeniable. The next morning's headlines reversed like the wind itself. Dalton vindicated, whistleblower exposed as fraud. Whitmore resigned within hours. His public apology was terse, his reputation ruined. But Preston didn't celebrate. That night, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. Rain tapped gently on the window, a rhythm that mirrored his thoughts. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. Lila knocked softly before entering. "It's over," she said. He looked at her. "No, it's begun." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Preston leaned back. Whitmore was just a symptom. The real sickness is fear. Fear of losing privilege. Fear of accountability. Until that changes, we'll keep fighting shadows. He turned toward the city lights. But maybe that's the point, to keep lighting candles, even when the dark keeps coming back. Across town, Amira watched the press conference replay on her laptop. She whispered to herself, "You did it, Dad." But her relief was short-lived. A few minutes later, a text flashed on her screen from an unknown number. "Your father won today. He won't win tomorrow." Her heartbeat quickened. She showed Natalie, who frowned, probably just trolls, but Amira wasn't sure. Something about the tone, the certainty, made her uneasy. 2 days later, Preston received an anonymous tip warning of sabotage at the company's upcoming investor summit in Dallas. Raymond urged him to cancel. "Sir, we can reschedule. It's too risky." Preston shook his head. "If I run from fear, I legitimize it. We go as planned. The Dallas summit opened in grand style. Hundreds of investors filled the hall, banners displaying North Star's slogan, "The future flies equal." Cameras rolled as Preston took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "North Star's journey has never been about perfection. It's been about progress. We stumbled, we learned, and we rose." The audience listened intently. Just as he paused to emphasize his next point, the lights flickered. Then, the large LED backdrop behind him flashed. A hacked message appeared in blood-red letters. "Ground him. Fake justice. Fake leader." Gasps erupted. Security scrambled. Lila leapt from her seat, whispering commands into her earpiece. Preston stayed still for a second, his calm cutting through the chaos. Then he turned to the crowd and said evenly, "This right here is why we must continue, because truth scares those who hide in shadows." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then roaring. The lights stabilized. Within minutes, technicians regained control of the system. After the event, in the security room, IT staff traced the breach to an internal access point. One registered under a name Preston didn't expect Tracy Hunt. His heart sank. That can't be right. Raymond nodded grimly. The system shows her credentials were used to log in remotely 3 hours ago. Preston called her immediately. When she answered, her voice trembled. "Sir, I didn't. Someone stole my ID. I swear." He believed her, but the damage was done. The same media that once defended him now painted new doubt. Internal staff behind hacked North Star's integrity. Questioned again. It was relentless, exhausting, and yet somehow familiar. Preston had learned that progress was not a straight line. It was a climb through storms, one steady step at a time. That night, he met Tracy in person. She looked pale, frightened. "Mr. Dalton, I'm sorry. I thought leaving my tablet at the maintenance hub was no big deal. I didn't know someone would use it." He sighed, not angry, just weary. "Tracy, integrity isn't about never failing. It's about what you do when failure finds you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'll resign." He shook his head. "You'll stay and help rebuild the system from the inside. Redemption isn't resignation." She nodded slowly, a spark of purpose returning. Meanwhile, Amira followed every headline, every rumor, every hateful thread. But she also noticed something else: messages from strangers thanking her for her courage. Parents telling her how their kids finally felt seen when she refused to move from that seat. One comment stayed with her. "You reminded my daughter that dignity doesn't need permission." She smiled softly. Maybe that was the point. The following week, Preston held a smaller meeting with his leadership team. "We're not reacting anymore," he said. "We're setting the narrative. From today, every employee will undergo a transparency and accountability rotation, no exceptions, including me." Lila nodded approvingly. "You're making equality operational, not optional." Preston smiled faintly. "Exactly." Outside the boardroom, sunlight broke through a thin layer of clouds. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Later that evening, as the city glowed beneath a watercolor sunset, Preston stood on the rooftop terrace of his apartment. Watching planes cross the horizon, Amira joined him quietly. "You ever get tired of fighting?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "Every day. So why keep going?" He turned to her, because some battles aren't meant to be won quickly. They're meant to be witnessed. She leaned on the railing beside him. You think people will ever stop hating. He took a long breath. Maybe not, but we can make it harder for hate to find a home. They stood in silence, watching a North Star jet trace silver lines across the twilight sky. Somewhere on that plane, maybe a young black girl sat in first class, smiling without fear. And that, Preston thought, was worth every storm. The week after the Dallas summit felt endless. Reporters camped outside North Star headquarters, stock analysts speculated wildly, and social media buzzed with conspiracy threads that twisted every event into suspicion. Preston moved through it all with quiet precision, speaking little, observing much. He'd been through crises before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Late one evening, he stood by the window of his office, the city glittering below. Rain streaked down the glass, reflecting his face like a ghost of himself. Lila entered silently, holding a tablet. "We found the source," she said. "The hack, the threats, the leaks all traced back to one node. An old North Star server farm outside Newark. Long decommissioned, but someone reactivated it." Preston turned. "Who has clearance?" "3 names. You, me, and Whitmore." His brow furrowed. Whitmore resigned. He did, but his credentials weren't fully revoked before IT reset the system. Preston felt his jaw tighten. So he's still fighting a war he already lost. Lila nodded grimly. "He's partnered with an external consultancy, one specializing in reputation reclamation. They're feeding disinformation online, targeting Clear Skies and you personally." Preston exhaled, slow and heavy. "Then we expose them again, quietly, thoroughly." Meanwhile, Amira was back at school trying to pretend life was normal, but whispers followed her through hallways. One afternoon, as she was gathering books from her locker, a folded note slipped through the gap in the metal door. She opened it cautiously. "Your father may run the skies, but gravity always wins." Her fingers trembled slightly. She knew hate when she saw it subtle, venomous, hiding behind clever words. She texted her father immediately, sending a photo of the note. He replied within minutes. "Don't worry, come straight home, I'll handle it." But Amira wasn't afraid. She was angry. Angry that even after everything, the proof, the reforms, the speeches, people still found ways to twist good into threat. That night, while her father worked late, she sat at the kitchen table, sketching something on her tablet. It wasn't art, it was a message. A digital poster that read, "Dignity needs no defense." Beneath the words, she drew a silhouette of a young girl looking up at a plane breaking through clouds. When she posted it anonymously, she expected maybe a few likes. Instead, it went viral within hours. Thousands of people shared it under the hashtag "Dignity needs no defense." For the first time in weeks, North Star trended for something beautiful. At headquarters, Raymond rushed into Preston's office holding his phone. "Sir, you need to see this." Preston looked at the screen, his brows lifting. "Who made it? No one knows. But it's changing the conversation. People are talking about hope again, not scandal." He smiled faintly. Maybe the sky fights back after all. The following morning, while the world buzzed with Amira's anonymous art, Preston met privately with federal investigators. "Mr. Dalton," said Agent Ramirez, "we've confirmed that the server breach wasn't just an internal act. It's linked to a larger data operation, one funneling misinformation to stock manipulators." Preston listened carefully. "So Whitmore isn't working alone?" "No, Ramirez replied. "He's connected to a syndicate that profits off corporate chaos. They plant scandals, crash shares, buy low, then disappear." Lila clenched her fists. They used social division as a stock strategy. Preston's gaze hardened. "Then we show them the cost of underestimating integrity." 2 days later, North Star hosted an emergency live-streamed town hall. Preston stood on stage once again. But this time, the atmosphere was different, charged not with fear, but resolve. "I've been accused of many things lately," he began, voice steady, ambition, naivety, self-righteousness. "But there's one accusation I'll gladly accept, believing too deeply in people's ability to change." He looked directly into the cameras. "We found those responsible for the recent sabotage. They acted out of greed, not truth. But this isn't about villains, it's about systems that reward silence. And I won't run an airline built on silence." Behind him, the screen displayed graphs of transparency data, equality audits, and community engagement metrics. It wasn't rhetoric, it was proof of transformation. "This company will not just transport people," Preston continued. "It will represent them, all of them." The applause began slowly, then built like a wave. Even employees who had doubted him found themselves clapping, drawn by something undeniable, authentic conviction. That evening, Preston returned home to find Amira sitting on the couch, laptop open, face glowing with quiet pride. "You saw it?" she asked. "I did," he said, smiling. "The whole world did. You started something bigger than both of us." She tilted her head. "You knew it was me," he chuckled. "You think I wouldn't recognize your handwriting even digital." She blushed slightly, but her eyes were proud. "It felt like people needed to remember why we were fighting in the first place." He nodded. "They did, and you reminded them. For a few blessed weeks, calm returned. But justice has a strange way of circling back for unfinished business." In early spring, an encrypted email reached Lila's inbox. The sender was unknown. The message was brief. "You think the storm's over. It hasn't even begun." Attached was a document financial record suggesting that the syndicate behind the sabotage had infiltrated other airlines, manipulating safety compliance to create public scares. Lila's pulse quickened. "Preston, this isn't just about us anymore. It's an industry-wide operation." He studied the files, then it's time to take it public. Together, they contacted the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and major media outlets. A week later, a joint investigation was announced. The headlines were "Explosive Corporate Sabotage Ring Exposed Manipulating Safety Reports for Profit." And in every report, North Star was praised as the whistleblower. The company's stock soared. Preston's reputation, once dragged through mud, now gleamed with credibility. But for Preston, it wasn't about vindication, it was about peace. The night after the story broke, he sat in his garden, the scent of jasmine and rain mixing in the cool air. Amira joined him with 2 cups of tea. "You finally look like you can breathe again," she said. He smiled softly. "Maybe I can." For the first time in a long while, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Amira asked, "Do you ever regret it? Standing up? I mean, wouldn't life have been easier if you'd just stayed quiet?" He looked at her, eyes thoughtful. "Easier, maybe, but smaller. And I've never been interested in living small." She nodded, her gaze drifting upward. "You know, every time I see one of your planes in the sky, I think about that day, about how it started with a seat." He chuckled gently. a seat that became a stand. They laughed quietly together. Days later, as North Star prepared for its annual gala, a celebration of recovery and reform, Preston received an unexpected visitor. Tracy Hunt stood at his door, holding a small wrapped box. "Mr. Dalton," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on me." He smiled. "You did the hard part, Tracy." She shook her head. "No, sir. You showed me what second chances look like." She handed him the box. Inside was a silver keychain engraved with the words "Grace over Pride." He held it for a long moment. "You know," he said quietly, "I think we both learned the same lesson." That evening, the gala hall shimmered under golden light. Executives, pilots, flight attendants, and staff mingled, laughter mixing with soft jazz. On the stage, banners displayed the phrase, "The sky belongs to everyone." When Preston took the podium, the room fell silent. "This company was born from a dream," he began. "A dream that the sky could unite people, not divide them. We lost that for a moment, but we found it again, not through perfection, but through persistence." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Lila, Raymond, Tracy, Amira, every single one of you carried a piece of this fight. Tonight isn't just a celebration, it's a promise. Applause thundered through the hall. Cameras flashed. But amid the glamour, Preston's voice softened. "We've seen how quickly dignity can be denied. Let's make sure it's never delayed again." The music swelled. Champagne glasses clinked. And for the first time in months, laughter sounded like healing. Later that night, as the event wound down, Preston stepped outside to the terrace. Amira followed him, her dress catching the light of the city below. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he said, "but not because of the lights, because of the people who made them shine again." She smiled. "You always talk like you're in a movie." He laughed softly. "Maybe life's better that way." They stood side by side, father and daughter, both looking up at a North Star plane soaring overhead, its engines humming like a promise fulfilled. Preston whispered, "You know, Amira, when I first started this company, I thought I was building airplanes. Turns out I was building bridges." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "And you built one that carried me, too." He placed an arm around her shoulders. "That's the only one that matters." For a long time, they said nothing, just watched the stars reflected on the glass wings above. And somewhere deep inside, Preston felt something he hadn't in years. Not triumph, not vindication, but peace, the quiet kind that comes when you've faced every storm and learned that some skies clear only after you walk through the thunder. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Dalton residence. The storm had finally broken, and the city glimmered beneath a freshly washed sky. Preston stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, brewing coffee. The scent of roasted beans mixed with the faint hum of an early newscast playing in the background. The anchors were smiling now, not dissecting scandal, but celebrating transformation. North Star Airlines, one of them said, has officially been named one of Fortune's most ethical companies of the year, marking a remarkable turnaround after one of the most turbulent chapters in aviation history. Preston turned off the TV. He didn't need to hear the rest. The recognition was nice, but it wasn't the destination. It was only proof that the journey had meant something. Amira entered quietly, her hair tied loosely, wearing one of his oversized sweatshirts. She smiled sleepily. "You're up early again." He handed her a mug. Old habits. She sipped and sighed. It feels quiet today, like the world finally exhaled. Preston looked out the window toward the skyline, streaks of pink and gold brushing the clouds. Maybe it did. Maybe we all did. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe not the shallow, defensive kind of breath that came between crises, but a full, steady one that reached the center of his chest, the kind that felt like survival turning into peace. A phone vibrated on the counter. Raymond's name flashed. Preston answered with a calm he hadn't known in years. "Mornin', Ray. Mornin'. Sir, sorry to bother you, but there's something you should see. Turn on Channel 7. Preston did. The screen showed a live broadcast from Chicago's O'Hare Airport. A crowd had gathered near a gate beneath a North Star banner. The anchor spoke over the noise. This morning, North Star Airlines unveiled a new initiative, a scholarship program for underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation, named in honor of CEO Preston Dalton's daughter, Amira. Amira nearly dropped her mug. "Dad, what is that?" Preston smiled, genuinely surprised. "That's new to me," the reporter continued. "The Amira initiative will sponsor 100 students annually across engineering, piloting, and leadership programs, focusing on creating access where it's historically been denied." Amira stared at him, speechless. He met her gaze with warmth. "I guess this is what legacy looks like when it surprises even you." A tear welled in her eye. "Dad, that's—" He interrupted softly. "It's not about us. It's about everyone who'll never have to go through what we did." A call came through his other line. "Lila." He answered. "Nice touch." "Lila." She laughed. "You weren't supposed to find out this way, but yes, it's real. The board approved it unanimously. You've built something that outlived the storm. Preston, enjoy it." He smiled. "You always were 2 steps ahead. Someone has to be," she teased. "By the way, Tracy's leading the orientation for the first class of scholarship students. Full circle." "Huh?" Preston paused, his chest tightening with quiet emotion. "That's perfect." Later that afternoon, Preston visited the North Star Academy hangar, an airy, modern training center buzzing with young faces full of hope. Tracy stood at the podium, addressing the new recruits. When she saw him enter, her voice softened but didn't falter. "Years ago, I was part of a mistake that almost cost this company its soul. But people don't remember me for that. They remember me for what I chose to do after. So when you wear this uniform, remember redemption isn't a moment. It's a practice." The room applauded. Preston watched from the doorway, pride filling every line of his face. After the ceremony, Tracy approached him, smiling shyly. "You didn't tell me you were coming. I didn't want to steal the spotlight." He replied. She shook her head. "You couldn't if you tried. These kids, when they talk about you, it's not like you're their boss. It's like you're a compass." Preston smiled. "Then let's make sure we keep pointing north, outside the hangar." Amira waited by his car, scrolling through her phone. "They love her," she said as he approached. "You should have seen the comments on the live stream. People are calling her proof that grace works." He nodded. "She's earned it." They drove home in comfortable silence, the radio playing soft jazz. The city passed by in glimpses, billboards, buses, murals. One ad caught Amira's eye, a massive North Star banner reading, "The sky belongs to everyone." She smiled, whispering the words under her breath. That evening, as dusk fell, The Daltons sat on the balcony overlooking the skyline. The air was cool, crisp, filled with possibility. Amira broke the silence first. "Do you ever miss Mom most when things get good?" she asked quietly. Preston's hand tightened slightly around his cup. Every single time. Amira nodded, eyes glistening. "I think she'd be proud. Not because we fought, but because we forgave." He looked at her with a soft smile. "That's the real victory." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you ever going to tell people the whole story about that flight? About everything Preston gazed at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun touched the edge of the world? Maybe someday. But for now, I'd rather let the story live through what we do, not what we say." The next morning brought another surprise. Amira's anonymous artwork, the one that had sparked a movement, was chosen by the Smithsonian's Museum of American History for their Voices of Change exhibit. The curator's statement read, "This piece became a symbol of resilience in the modern civil rights narrative." When she read the email, Amira froze. Then she burst out laughing, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, they're putting my drawing in a museum." He looked at her with pure pride. The sky just got a little wider. "Huh." She hugged him tightly. "You think it's weird, right, that something so simple could matter?" He shook his head. "Sometimes the simplest things remind people they're human." Weeks later, Preston stood once again before an audience, but this time, it wasn't a press conference or a crisis briefing. It was a TED stage in Vancouver. The room was dark except for the spotlight that followed him as he began to speak. "Most people think justice feels like thunder," he said. "But sometimes it's just the sound of someone breathing again after being silenced." He told their story not by names, but by essence. The bias, the humiliation, the fight, and the rebirth. He spoke of systems and souls, of how power without empathy corrodes, and how empathy without courage collapses. When he ended, the room rose in a standing ovation. After the talk, a young man approached him backstage, eyes bright. "Mr. Dalton, my mom was denied a promotion because of her accent. I showed her your speech. She said it made her feel seen." Preston smiled, shaking his hand. "Then keep seeing her. That's how change starts." By summer, Clear Skies had expanded into 9 other airlines. The FAA adopted several of North Star's equity frameworks as national standards. And the Amira Initiative had already funded its first class of future aviators. On a warm August morning, Preston and Amira visited the company's newest training jet, a sleek, silver-blue model painted with the words Unity 1. It was the first aircraft built entirely under the Clear Skies protocol, designed by diverse engineers, mechanics, and flight crews from over 20 backgrounds. As they walked up the ramp, Amira paused to trace her fingers along the name on the fuselage. Unity 1. She read softly. "That's beautiful." Preston smiled. "You named it." She looked at him, surprised. What he laughed. "You suggested it months ago when you said we should stop calling things first class and start calling them equal class. I just took the spirit of it." She chuckled. "You're sneaky, old man." "Strategic," he corrected, grinning. Inside, the cabin glowed with soft lighting. Instead of rigid partitions, there were flexible layouts designed for inclusivity, spacious aisles, universal seating access, sensory-friendly zones. It wasn't just luxury. It was humanity engineered into space. As they reached the cockpit, Preston stopped. "Want to see something?" She nodded. He pointed to a small plaque mounted just below the instrument panel. It read, "Dedicated to everyone who refused to give up their seat in life." Her eyes filled with tears. "That's us. That's everyone," he said softly. They stood there in silence for a long moment, surrounded by the hum of possibility. Outside the window, another North Star plane lifted gracefully into the sky, its wings slicing through the blue. Amira whispered, "Do you think it'll ever stop people judging? Dividing?" Preston smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But as long as there's someone willing to stand up, they'll never win for long." As the engines roared to life, he looked out at the horizon, the morning light spilling endlessly forward. And for the first time since that day on the plane, the day everything began, he felt the air clear, the path open, the weight lift. It wasn't just his redemption, it was theirs. When they left the jet, a small crowd of young cadets waited outside. One of them, a shy boy with dark skin and bright eyes, stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Dalton, I just wanted to say, I'm here because of you, because you didn't give up." Preston rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then promise me something. When it's your turn, don't just fly the plane, change the sky." The boy nodded, eyes shining. "I will." Preston smiled. "That's all I need to hear." That night, back home, father and daughter sat again on their familiar balcony. The stars shimmered above, and planes crossed the heavens like tiny constellations of hope. Amira leaned her head on his shoulder. "You ever think about how it all started?" He chuckled. "A flight attendant, a seat, and one very stubborn girl." She laughed softly. "Guess being stubborn runs in the family. Guess it does." They fell silent, watching another North Star jet ascend into the night. The city glowed beneath them. Life, for the first time, felt both grounded and free. Preston whispered, half to himself, "You know what I see when I look at that sky, what she asked?" He smiled gently. "Not clouds, not distance. I see room for everyone." And with that, he leaned back, the hum of airplanes fading into the rhythm of his heartbeat. The sky stretched endlessly ahead. No longer a battlefield, but a bridge. Justice had taken flight, and this time, it was never coming down. This story reminds us that true power isn't measured by wealth, titles, or control, but by how we treat others when we think no one is watching. Preston Dalton and his daughter Amira show that dignity can't be bought or denied. It lives in every quiet act of courage, every moment we choose empathy over ego. The flight attendant's failure was not just a personal bias, it reflected a system built on assumptions. Yet, through accountability and grace, even she found a path to redemption. In life, we will all face moments where silence feels safer than truth. But change begins the moment we decide to speak, to act, and to lead with integrity. For older generations who have seen injustice come and go, this story is a reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means teaching the next generation to rise higher, kinder, and wiser. Because justice is not a storm that passes, it's a sky we build together. One act of respect at a time. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this story with us. Every view, every comment, every share helps keep these powerful stories of justice and hope alive. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that reminds the world kindness, dignity, and courage still matter. Stay tuned for the next story that might just change how you see the world.